Have your Bibles open up to Psalm chapter 1. Psalm chapter 1. Been a series called 10 Rules for Relationships. 10 Rules for Relationships. It's really based on the 10 Commandments. And the idea of the 10 Commandments is really it was originally for the Israelites, right, to have an understanding of what are the do's and don'ts of being this chosen group of people. And one of those rules is what we're going to talk about tonight. It's do not bear false witness, or what is more commonly known as don't lie. And we see this play out in the early story of Genesis, right? I mean, how many of you guys know that early story of Genesis with Adam and Eve in the garden, right? And they can eat of any tree except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? That's the one tree they can't eat from. And they're walking in total harmony with God. So you think about like everything that would keep you from God right now in your life. If you think about that. If you eliminate every barrier that you have from God, that's how Adam and Eve walked with God. So any doubt, any distance, any silence. You ever felt like God was silent from you? Anything that would keep you from God, that was not a reality in the garden. Adam and Eve were walking perfectly with him. And in order to establish love, he had to establish choice. And in establishing choice and love, he says, hey, don't eat of that tree. The tree of knowledge and good and evil. As you know, the story goes, the serpent will come up to him and say, hey, did God really say ... Which is interesting, right? Because the first lie ever told was simply a twist of the truth. Where the serpent convinces Adam and Eve to eat of the tree they were told not to eat of because they would be what? Like him. And so the lie that was first told and accepted, received, and acted on was a lie about identity. You'll see from there that Adam and Eve will be ashamed. Ashamed of the consequences that comes with the decision that they made. Which really, if you think about it, that's what you and I started lying with. You know what I never had to teach my kids? I never had to teach them the word no. They just figured that one out on their own. I had to teach them yes ma'am, yes sir. I had to teach them like kind words. I had to teach them respect. I had to teach them to not put their feet on the table. I did not ever have to teach them the word no. They learned that on their own. What's that come from? It comes from the garden. The first lie turned into a sin. And that sin then entered into the world. The Bible will call the serpent or Satan the chief of all liars. And so tonight, as we talk about the 10 rules for relationship, we want to establish why is it important that Christians, followers of Jesus, tell the truth? What does that mean, and why does it matter? I want to begin tonight's message with just a moment of transparency. I've been a pastor for 13 years, but I took a year off of ministry because I was addicted to gambling. I remember one night in particular at Green Valley. It was about Green Valley Casino. It was about a mile from where we had church. I was a youth pastor, middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Such a fun experience. But I quickly, in my journey to become a youth pastor, about this not even completing my first year of ministry, my friends came out, went to the poker table. I went with them. They went home. I stayed. Because I lived there. And it started out as just something that I did casually, and that casual thing led to a full-blown addiction to where I was gambling all night long, going to the church office, sitting in meetings, going to the evening, preaching at youth group, going back to the casino, sleeping very little. I was making $24,000 a year, and almost all of it was spent on gambling. And I was thinking about, when I thought about this message about honesty or lying or not bearing false witness, I was thinking about how did I get there? I remember sitting at the poker table and coming up with how to cover up my lie. I was coming up with how I would convince everybody around me that I was doing okay, that I was still in a healthy position, that I was worthy of leadership, that I was worthy of the platform that I had been given, that I was the shepherd of this community, these 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, their parents likely serving right in this very casino that I'm gambling at, and it's less than a mile from the church to the casino, and I'm like, how did I get here? You ever been in a place where you've even forgot where you started the lie that you're in? You know, there's a progression with lying, and that's what I want to take a look at today. Because the truth is, I could read for you the commandment, do not lie. We could pray and get out of here, and you guys go tell the truth the rest of your days. But obviously, if we know from the very first story in the Bible that there's something attached to deception that we're drawn to, right? Why are we drawn to deception? Well, we learned about it in the first story, Genesis chapter 3. Identity, consequence. You can tie every single lie to identity, consequence. Who am I? And how do I avoid the consequences from my choices? There was a Mexican restaurant that during COVID, they'd post all these really funny signs. Have you guys seen this one? And they'll post like all random kinds of stuff, right? And one of them was, oh, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. But what do we do, right? Even if you have kids, what do we do? What do your kids do when they do something wrong? First thing out of their mouth, first thing on their mind, they lie. Why? Well, it's either because of an identity issue or because they're trying to avoid a consequence. All lies are birthed out of that. But the thing is, here's how this works. And if you've been down a path, a really dark path like me, where you're literally living a double life, where you're trying to convince the world that you're something that you're not, you don't wake up one day and go, I'm going to deceive everybody on who I am. At least I didn't. No, you start by telling a lie. Then you continue on to manage the lie. And before you know it, you are what? Living a lie. If you have a Bible, Psalm chapter 1, I want you to see this take place in the book, in the opening chapter of Psalms. I want you to see the progression of sin in this chapter, not particularly on lying. It's really sin in general, but I think lying certainly plays a massive role in this chapter. Or at least it's applied in a similar fashion. It says this, "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do." There's a contrasting reality in this. It's first contrasting people that buy into the wickedness of this world. Then it goes on to describe the contrasting reality of somebody that's planted by a stream. Think about like a healthy tree that's bearing fruit. And you look next to that stream, there's a water source. You look up in the sky, there's a sun, and that's a beautiful tree that provides shade and fruit. The contrasting reality is what? Let's read it again. Verse 1. Watch this. "Oh, the joys of who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with the sinners, or join in with the mockers." Does anybody have the NIV version with them right now? You have it? Read it real loud. Same verse 1, Psalm 1, verse 1. Read it real loud.
"Blessed is the one who does not walk in the step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord."
Perfect. Did you see that? Read it one more time. Just watch this.
"Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord."
Okay, so this is what happens. Happened in the garden, Genesis chapter 3. We see it, the psalmist writing about it right here. Did you see what happened? What happened? A lie starts because you're walking by wickedness, enticed by wickedness. It's either a wickedness of telling you that you need to be elevated above where you should be in the order of creation, right? Or on the other side of it, where you feel so low and you beat yourself up, and so you feed yourself a lie. The enemy will tell you a lie that you're the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever, and it depends on the day and depends on what you're susceptible to. And oftentimes, we're just walking by the wickedness, or the wickedness is walking by us. And what do? We have a choice in that moment to either believe that lie, tell that lie, or tell ourselves the truth and tell everybody else the truth. And it starts by making the choice that in the moment that a lie comes up in your head or around you, that we're going to nip it in the butt. Right? This morning, Brian preached at Anthem, and he talked about how we need to take every thought captive. That would be taking a lie. We need to take that captive and then submit it back to the truth. Right? Because if we don't do that, what happens? We walk by it, and then what happens when we next? Then we stand. See that? First, it just passes us by, or we pass it by. But then all of a sudden, we stop. And we give that lie a little attention, don't we? We give that thought attention. We start to believe that. We start to go back to something in our past, a pain, a trigger, a moment. Or the shame of the person standing in front of us. So now the lie's not passing us by. We're not passing the lie by. Now we're standing with that lie. But it gets worse, doesn't it? Because the minute we start to stand with a lie and get comfortable with a lie, right? You ever started out feeling very convicted of something, and then you get to a place where it doesn't even bother you anymore? You follow me on that? Why? You walked by it, then you stood with it, and then what? Then you sit. Oh, snap. Pull up a chair. Boom. Guys, I'm sitting in this casino, and I'll never forget that I start out, there's this thing called limit hold'em. And limit hold'em basically limits the amount of money that you can spend on a certain hand. So when you're newer to poker table, that's what you play. And so that's what me and my buddies were playing. And when they left, I just went back one night, right? I walked by it, then I stood next to it, and then I sat down with it. And I remember looking at the other table. The other table was no limit hold'em. There was no limits to how good I could be at that table. So eventually, I get up from that table, I walk over to No Limit Poker, and that's where the big boys played. And let me just tell you, I wasn't a very good gambler. Nobody is. That's why there's casinos built. They're not built on the person that won. And that began my journey, and really it was an 8-year journey, because in the first year I got addicted to gambling, and then I surrounded myself with some people. Those people helped me manage that, but I'd fall back in and then manage it, and then fall back in and then manage it. And then I got married, and all of a sudden I wasn't losing my money, I was losing what? Our money. And then what did I start doing? I was married to a woman who had no idea I had an addiction. One, because I wasn't using that word, and two, because I had gotten so used to managing a lie that I started living one. And then you get married. And I was so ashamed of this lie that I was living. It resurfaced on a cruise ship with my family. It resurfaced Super Bowl Sunday with my brother, who had no idea I had this addiction. Fall back into it. Start spending the money. I'll never forget. I lost, I think it was $500 that night. And it's the same exact thing as Psalm chapter 1. I was doing really good with my addiction. And my brother invited me out, and I'm like, I'll go. I won't bring any money. So I'm standing by it, I'm watching him. Next thing I know, I'm sitting next to him, sliding me chips over. Chips are going in, losing chips, going to the ATM. Lost $500 that night. And I did this deal with God. You ever done this deal with God? God, if you'll bail me out of this one night of poor decision making, I'll follow you forever. I'll be the best Christian in human history. Just bail me out this once. All in. And God's like, you knucklehead. So I started chasing that money because the goal was, hey, if I just get to even, wife will never know. I can go on as this little blip in the radar, speed bump in my journey, on the road to wherever God's leading me. I would sneak out, lie to my wife, and go play these little poker machines. In Vegas, you can gamble anywhere. Gas station, like a wing shop, the bathroom. You can gamble anywhere. You have a card, they'll take it. They're like slots while you go pee. And I would sneak out, and I got to the place where I was so paralyzed by this double life that I was living. I remember laying down in bed, and I remember feeling very strongly for the Lord. He, like, literally heard, turn your head to the right, tell the truth. Turn your head to the right, tell the truth. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And then, here's what my response to God was. Just let me get caught. Have you ever been in such a deep place, dark place, so far gone, that you're literally praying for it to come to light? Because you don't have the courage, you don't have the strength. That's where I was. The next night I slept on the couch. By choice. The night after that, slept on the couch because I was so ashamed. And the morning after that third night, one was the first night was the one he told me to confess. The second night was because I was so ashamed. And the third night was so ashamed. My wife was prompted to check the savings account where I moved all the money, pulled it out of the savings, moved the money, pulled it out of the savings, moved the money. She never checked the savings account. One morning, she finally did. I was sleeping on the couch, and I remember the stomps of her coming down the stairs, her taking off her ring and throwing it at me, and saying, you might as well have had an affair. How many times are you going to lie? I tell you that story because that's just one of probably thousands of lies I've told. And you go, what is it about a lie that's so destructive? What is it about a lie that destroys relationship? As we talked about this particular command or this rule for a relationship, right? Because that's the idea here, is there's 10 rules for relationships. The first 4 is focused primarily on your relationship with the Lord. The next 6 focus primarily on your relationship with each other, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And, say it with me, love your as yourself. And the 10 commandments are the rules by which you're supposed to follow those. I'm supposed to follow those in order for us to maintain a relationship with God, because that's his greatest desire, is that he would have a relationship with the people that he created. But holy and perfect and set apart from everything else he made, he needs to make sure that those who he's in a relationship with also maintain the holiness that his character represents. And here are the rules to keep it right between you and me. Here are the rules to keep it right between you and each other. And when you lay each command across the greatest command, each rule for a relationship across the greatest command, think about this. How does lying impact your relationship with God? How does lying impact your view of yourself? How does lying impact your relationship with somebody else? So if you lay that command over across all 3 elements of the greatest command. The first idea is that, hey, I love God with everything I am, my heart, mind, soul, right? Every fabric of who you are, right? Because you were knit together in his womb. He spent time on you. He was interested in you. You're special, unique. Nobody's like you. And in that, he wants you to be connected to him. And what does truth-telling have anything to do with that? Because if God is real, And if what Jesus said is true, I am the way, the what? And the... So if he created a world that is real, and Jesus is the truth, then he wants you and I to live in it. And what a lie does is it distorts reality, and it deceives yourself and those around you, and in that creates a false world that God didn't make. It's a violation of God because it's a violation of what God made. So how many of you guys are artists? Artists? Yeah, Liz is an artist. Anybody else artist? I think Liz would. Any artists over here? Any musicians? Writers? Poets? Yeah, art of any kind. Can you imagine if somebody else described your work? That's what you and I do when we tell a lie. We're describing the world that God made in a way that it doesn't reflect what he intended. It's a violation of him because it's a violation of what he made. Then let's go into the second part, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor what? So what it's saying is interconnected to your ability to love God with everything you have, every fiber of your being, every facet of how God has made you. He's saying the standard by which you love everybody else is the proper view of yourself. Those who think too highly of themselves are arrogant. Those who think too low of themselves are insecure. And I'll tell you, arrogant people are hard to be around. And insecure people are hard to have a relationship with. Think about that. The as yourself sets the tone by which you love everybody else. And where do we get the as yourself? The proper view of yourself, right? Paul will write in the letters, do not think more highly of yourself than you ought to. How ought you think of yourself? How ought I think of myself? Well, with the truth. That I am created by God, but I am not God. I'm created for a purpose, and that purpose is not to build my kingdom or even follow my own pursuits. Because the truth is, Jeremiah will say that the heart is deceptive above all else. Who can trust it? So not even your heart you can trust, because it leads you astray. Those emotions, right? That one of the worst pieces of advice that you could ever give somebody is, follow your heart. You know why? Because your heart's jacked. Can you imagine if you followed your heart in 7th grade? Remember that girl? Remember that guy? Oh my gosh, she's so dreamy. Just follow your heart, man. Or high school?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the nightmare marriages I would have got myself in. Follow your heart. Oh my gosh, it's so good. No, it's terrible advice. Because you're emotionally invested in something, and as a result, your emotion is clouding your judgment to reality. And that's when other people can then speak life into you. And you're like, you don't know. I know he treats me like crud, but his heart is gold. No, you are following your heart, and your heart's jacked. And so, the relationship with everybody else, we haven't even got to your relationship with everybody else, must start with a proper view of who God is. He's the Most High God. He's the one that sets the truth. He's the one that creates the truth. What's my job? I discover it. And when I discover it, I tell it. Okay, so then what's the truth about me? I'm a son and daughter of the Most High God. He knit me in my mother's womb. He has a purpose for my days, and every breath that I have has a purpose, and I'm going to live out that purpose by pursuing him with my heart's here, mind's here, right? Soul, strength, everything I got. I'm going this way. Why? Because then that's going to set the proper view of myself. I don't think too highly of myself. I don't think too lowly of myself. And in that settling of the noise, now I know what to do with relationships. You want to know why you don't have good relationships? It's probably because you either have a bad view of yourself or you have a bad view of God. If you have a solid view of God, the proper view of God, and out of that proper view of God comes a right view of self, I'm telling you, you're going to have healthy relationships. You're not going to be perfect. But you're going to know that truth matters. You're going to know that there's a place for grace. You're going to know that it's not all about you. You're going to know that that person is of value to God. See that? It's all connected. And it needs to be rooted in reality. Because telling the truth is accepting reality. That's why sometimes it's hard. Because sometimes accepting reality is accepting well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. And yet, we know, right, the quicker we can come to the acceptance of whatever it is that we've done, or the consequences of what we've done, then we can begin to heal and move on. See how it's all interconnected? Let's go now to the loving your neighbor as yourself. When we talk about loving your neighbor as yourself, when you think about this idea of telling a lie, it's a violation of the person, right? I grew up, I was going to say I grew up as a kid. You're like, shocking. I was a kid, and my mom and dad are divorced. I think I was 7 or 8. And he's my hero. And looked up to him. He was the one that coached my teams. He's just a larger than life presence. Like even his forearms were just massive. He's just like this huge dude. He looked kind of like a Harley Davidson rider, but if he swallowed a bowling ball. Just like massive in every way. Now you know what my future's like. Big bald guy, big goatee, my hero. And as a kid, I'd go to see him every other weekend. Or at least that was the plan. But you see, my dad had a really rough childhood. Despite having different seasons of his life where he was doing well with the Lord, it was between managing addictions, never fully dealing with the reality of his pain, that he started living a lie. So much so that he didn't even know what the truth is anymore. I remember being a kid and him telling us that he was going to come to our soccer games. And I remember playing left midfielder on the sideline of where my team was. And I remember running up and down the game. And there was one game going on, and it was the score and the goal. But the only thing I cared about was whether or not my dad was coming. I remember being a kid at the dirt road, Los Pocos Road on the 5 freeway. It was a halfway point. It's where my parents met. I remember waiting, and every car that would come off the freeway, if it looked like my dad's truck. But my dad couldn't deal with reality. So he had to tell lies. And so that lie then begins to impact myself. You see how this works? Now it works backwards. Because we tell lies to each other, which hurts the way that we view ourselves. We buy lies from other people. We buy lies from the enemy, and the enemy's just working overtime, right? Because he knows, the enemy knows, if you get this one right, and then you get this one right, then you're going to get this one right. So then he tries to screw up this one, that screws up this one, that screws up this one. He works backwards. So now you've got an 8, 9-year-old kid who doesn't even know his worth is. Because his hero doesn't show up. Because his hero tells lies. I love my dad. I still love my dad. And but what's interesting now, and he's in a fairly good place with a lot of it, but he's lived this pattern for so long that there's often times where my brothers and I hear him tell a story, and he's not even intending to lie. But all of us are looking at each other like, that's not true. He literally doesn't even know how to tell the truth. Probably heard it called a pathological liar. And if you got to know my dad, you met him, you would see that most of his lies are not born in a malicious place. They're actually born in a very pure place. He doesn't want to disappoint anybody. And yet in not wanting to disappoint anybody, he spent his life, what? Disappointing people. My friends, I think it's so important as followers of Jesus that we get really, really comfortable with the truth. That's why at the Hills and at Anthem, we look to this, right? You may go, wait, what is this? I mean, it says Holy Bible on it, but what I believe this is the greatest collection of truth. This book has the most information about what's true about God. This book has the most information about what's true about you. This book has the most information about what's true about how we should treat each other. When we get comfortable with the truth, as hard as it is at times, the easier and the more purpose-filled life we can live. But that means we've got to accept one really, really hard thing about you and me. And it's that we're not good enough. We never have been and we never will be. But what I love about not only this book being a book of truth, it's also a story. And the story that it tells is a story of a God who is perfect, holy. He lives in total reality, never tells a lie. He creates people, unique, special. Paul will write to the church at Ephesus that you and I are a poema. It's where we get the word what? Poem. You're a poem. You're God's poem. And he wrote you, took time out of his day, not that he has days, to shape and craft you the way you look, the way you are, like the very thing you don't like about you. He's like, man, that's my girl. Man, that's my boy. Man, that's my poem. God will write to the book of Ephesus that you are God's masterpiece or poema. And when we begin to settle in both to the reality that we're not good enough, and yet there's a God in heaven who's perfect, set apart, all-powerful, and yet so unbelievably personable, he's interested in you and I. And though we're not good enough, he sent his son because he loves us that much, because he's so invested in the poem that he wrote. But he sent his own son to pay the price for you and I in order for us to come back to reality. Jamiroquai? No? Anybody? It's kind of a weird moment for that joke, but that's fine. To come back to the place where we acknowledge that, hey, we're not good enough, but for some stinking reason that I'll never understand, he absolutely loves you. And your job, and my job, and our role in the story is that we fully accept the reality. We tell the truth. I'm not talking about just the truth on color of this table, or just the truth about what you did earlier this week, or just the truth about an insignificant. I'm talking about telling the truth about him to yourself. I'm talking about telling the truth about yourself to him. Like in this relationship, just fully grasping the reality of what it is to be in relationship with the Most High God, not good enough, but loved anyway. And out of that, God says that you and I are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. And now you're living in a new reality. And here's what happens with this. You accept that new reality every single day. We don't one time do it. Every day we wake up and I'm a son of the Most High God. I'm a daughter of the Most High God. That's who I am. But wait a minute, I made a mistake, or wait a minute, I fell into an old trap, or wait a minute, I start sinning, or hey, Chase starts gambling again. No, I wake up the next day and guess what? That's what I did. That's not who I am. You see, telling the truth starts with telling the truth about who he is, what he's done, and now who you are as a result of it. And you live out that identity, watch behavior follow. We think behavior dictates identity. No, God says identity dictates behavior. And before you ever did anything, you were my son. You were my daughter. I am calling you to live out of that reality. And when you don't, tell the truth.
Amen.
Confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that he is God. That's the reset button. And the best way to do this, keep short accounts. That means if you tell a lie, like even little, like tonight, if later on tonight you just like exaggerate a story, just stop. I'm lying. I'm so sorry. I just totally exaggerated the truth. Why? Because, well, you're not quite sure about your identity in that moment. You want to be something you're not, or, right, consequence. Those are the only two things that we lie about. It's all rooted in either identity or consequence. And the quicker you can come to the reality, I'm so sorry, that's not the truth. I'm so sorry, that's not the truth. Hey, you know what? I did that thing last week. I'm so sorry, that's not the truth. Then you get in the habit of catching it, right? I gotta be honest, this is something that I've struggled with a long time. Why? Because I was modeled a pattern of lying, and I was jacked as a kid by my dad. So I'm scared of consequences, and I'm not sure of who I am. And out of that comes a whole lot of lies. And so, that's why I'm glad that I don't have to live out of the identity that came from my earthly father. I live out of the identity that came from my heavenly Father. And he says, and I don't get this, that I'm worthy. He says, and I don't get this, I have purpose. He says, and I don't get this, he wants to spend forever with me. So my days need to be spent accepting the full weight of that reality. And then living out the truth. You see how it's all connected? It's not just a rule for a relationship. It's a rule for this relationship, for with in your relationship with yourself, and it's a rule for a relationship with everybody else. And it's all connected. Believe the truth about him. Believe the truth about who you are. And then tell the truth in living it out. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And when the world makes up lies, and when the world cheats and steals to get ahead, you keep telling the truth. And you trust that the God of heaven will honor that. And when somebody wrongs you and lies about you, and somebody's gossiping behind your back, and somebody's making stuff up because you keep telling the truth, and you keep earning credibility in relationships, and they're jealous, and they're envious, and they're this, and they're that, you keep telling the truth, and trust that God's going to honor that. And then one day, somebody will come up to you and go, what's different about you? You can tell them a story. Well, I got to be honest, it wasn't easy. But I had to come to the place where I could accept the reality. I believe the truth that there's God in heaven. I believe the truth that God in heaven cares about me. And that no matter what happens in my relationships, he's asking me to believe the truth, tell the truth, and live out the truth. That's the simple reality of the 7th commandment and the 10 rules for a relationship.